The Soviet Union, a godless communist power, had invaded a Muslim nation, Afghanistan. Saudi Arabia and the U.S. made a secret deal to contribute an equal amount to finance the war. Thousands of young Saudis were sent to fight alongside the Mujahideen.
The Saudi religious education and also the institutions of higher learning began to produce masses of young graduates who are very well conversant in Islamic theology, but who could not really be absorbed easily in the economy. And the Afghan war in the 80s provided an opportunity to absorb some of those Saudi youth. And this was actually encouraged by the government, who probably saw it as a way to release some of the tension. But they didn't realize the potential for an exploding situation later on.
For almost a decade, some 20,000 young Saudi volunteers made the trek to Afghanistan. There they would acquire military skills and come to believe that dedicated Islamic fighters could defeat a superpower. In 1982, Crown Prince Fahd became king after his brother Khalid died of a heart attack. The Iran-Iraq War was raging on his doorstep. Fahd befriended Saddam Hussein, a fellow Sunni, and gave him money and weapons to battle Shia Iran. 8 years later, the Saudis were not prepared for a sudden betrayal.
I'm sitting at home relaxing when the phone rings, and my mother is calling. She was in Paris. Her voice is very disturbed. How are you? I'm fine. How are things with you? Fine. What is happening with you? Nothing. What's happening? What's going on? Didn't you hear? No. What happened? Iraq has just invaded Kuwait. It was like a bomb had been dropped on me. I had no idea. Because at the time, we didn't have satellite television, and there was a total blackout to the news. Well, if you turned on the television, nothing.
The Saudis had not decided whether to announce it to their own population or not. Of course, everybody knew it. So it was so strange, so weird, and it was such an insight into the kind of paralysis, incomprehension that the regime found itself in the middle of.
In some ways, King Fahd, although a shrewd and to some degrees quite ruthless man, had many of the faults of his brother Saud. An eagerness to please everybody, a belief that everything could be sorted out with the money, which was pretty plentiful, that all would be for the best. And the bankruptcy of that, I think, was exposed to start with by the first Gulf War and Saudi Arabia's inability, after spending all this money, actually to cope with this threat themselves, this military threat from Iraq.
How could you justify spending so much money on an army that can't be used for any real combat situation? And this brought to the forefront this problem with the corruption, the commissions, the military contracts, and the inability of a sovereign state to defend itself in case of outside aggression.
During these first days of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, Osama bin Laden offered his services to the royals.
Bin Laden went to see some Saudi officials at the time. He told them he could bring his army from Afghanistan, his Mujahideen army, to repel the Iraqi invaders from Kuwait.
He was trying to meet with the king. That's why I met with him. So he had about 60 pages typed in his hand, and he started reading. They said, we have some people who are ready to fight. Said, how many? He said, about 15 to 20,000. He mentioned, he said, I want to make it clear, we need no weapons or equipment. We are very well equipped. We didn't need any support from anybody. And then he said, we are not going to fight for Kuwait. What we are about is to protect the Holy Lands, Mecca and the Medina. That's our goal.
He was told politely, thank you very much for your proposition. We will study it, but we'll get in touch with you. Don't call us, we'll call you.
Dismissing bin Laden was easy. The real dilemma was how to allow hundreds of thousands of American non-Muslim troops into the kingdom. This was certain to rile Islamic conservatives.
Everything in this country revolves somehow around religion. Now, this is something that a Westerner will never understand. And I'm not even going to try to make them understand because they simply won't. The religion is the law. It permeates the culture. It is rooted in the history. It is part of the DNA, if you like, of the Saudis. Therefore, any challenge has to go through the Islamic filter. We needed to understand whether it was permissible for the government of Saudi Arabia to invite hundreds of thousands of Westerners to come on Saudi soil in order to fight another Muslim country, which is Iraq.
There was some questions about whether the Saudis would accept U.S. forces. The president asked Secretary Cheney to go down and meet with the Saudi officials to tell them that we felt it was important to put some forces in there to deter the possible action by the Iraqis to move down the peninsula.
U.S. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, General Colin Powell, and General Schwarzkopf arrived in Saudi Arabia armed with satellite pictures showing the Iraqi army poised to move across the Saudi border.
I thought he was shaken by what he saw in those photos. After listening to General Schwarzkopf's briefing on the proposed American response, the king said, come. And then the Crown Prince said, don't you think there should be some consultation? And Fahd said, there's no time. If we delay, we may end up like Kuwait. There is no Kuwait anymore, he said. And Abdullah said, yes, there's a Kuwait. There is still a Kuwait. And Fahd said, yes, and its territory consists of hotel rooms in Cairo and Paris and London. And Abdullah said, I take your point. I agree.
King Fahd went back to the ulama and asked for a ruling or fatwa.
King Fahd asked the senior ulama, and they said that if you cannot work a peaceful settlement, then you must side with the victim to reverse the aggression. And if you have to avail yourself of support from non-Muslims, you do so.
The deal was concluded. More than 500,000 U.S. troops started arriving in the kingdom and neighboring countries. But regardless of the fatwa, hardline Saudi imams protested.
والينا أعداء الله تعالى وأحببناهم من قلوبنا ونسينا الفيصل بين الإيمان والكفر. هذه الموالاة للكفار هي من أسرار هزيمتنا.
أعتقد أن هذا من أكبر الأخطاء التي وقعت.
This was the biggest mistake committed by America. It caused all the hate and hostility. They came with their traditions, their army, and unfortunately with their behaviors, and wanted to force it on Muslims.
During these first months of Desert Shield, Saudi anxiety was amplified by an unexpected problem: money. The U.S. administration was bent on charging the Saudis for the war.
We were pulling together the coalition, we were furnishing the military effort, and we were in effect saving the bacon of a lot of people in the region, including the Kuwaitis and the Saudis. They were very well-to-do countries, and it was our thought that they should contribute to their defense. King Fahd was a very warm and engaging person to deal with. I remember When I first raised the issue of payment, he said, don't even talk to me about that. He said, what is money between friends? And in a situation like this, he said, you just go to the finance minister and you tell him what you think is appropriate or what you need. And that was the way he approached it.
The costs were picked out of thin air. No one really knew. And in some cases, we asked for figures that were simply concocted on the back of an envelope. In the end, what we took in covered the expenses of the war, and probably a little more. Secretary Baker and I had a number of arguments about this, because I felt that we were asking the Saudis for too much.
Ambassador Freeman said that the pot is not quite as rich as it has been, but there's nothing that's more important, he didn't say this, I did, nothing more important than their security and their continued well-being. And it clearly was fair and reasonable for the Saudis to contribute substantially.
They spent some $50 billion, and the result was that they started the war with no national debt. They ended it financially lamed and continue to suffer from the debt that the war produced.
The presence of Americans had other consequences. Some Saudi women were inspired to challenge long-standing social taboos, such as the ban on women driving.
American ladies were actually driving around Riyadh. So we thought, this is encouraging. Why don't we actually go and ask for that? We just said, okay, we will meet at the parking lot of the Safeway in Riyadh at 3 o'clock. We didn't want to tackle any other issues except the driving.
Suddenly, all these cars started arriving. There was about 24 cars, and all these very elegant, albeit covered Saudi women coming out of their cars to take the driver's seat. Was the Pakistani, the Indonesian drivers just sitting on the sidewalk in front of the supermarket.
We were 6 doctors from the university who have PhDs. Also, we were teachers from in public schools. Some of the ladies who were shopping in the Safeway, they saw all these ladies actually getting into the car, and they asked, what are you doing? And we said, we're going for a demonstration. He said, we'll just participate. That's wonderful. So they just get their drivers and get to the car with their things, and they drove with us. I mean, I remember one guy, he said, a Saudi guy, he said, good for you. He was really happy.
Now, within 10 minutes, these religious police, who are the guys with the beard and the short dresses, started swooping in on the demonstration.
Mutawas, of course, in our mind, are very scary. I have to tell you that. I remember that guy. He was really very fat, and he came and he asked me, "You stop your car," and I said, okay.
47 women were arrested. The ulama called the driving a source of depravity.
Good evening. The news from Channel 2 Saudi Arabian television.
The Ministry of the Interior would like to announce to all citizens and residents that all women are absolutely prohibited from driving cars in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It added, any woman who violates this regulation will be penalized.
In every city within the kingdom and all the mosques, millions of papers were distributed with our names and telephone numbers, and that we are Westerners and we are against the will of the societies and we have to be, prosecuted or whatever.
The notice called